last time we were in this room, I did all the general prep for our tent. That meant wiping down the surfaces so I didn't have to worry about mold spores or a dust problem. It meant protecting the floor so I didn't have to worry about water seeping through the bottom of my area, possibly destroying rooms down below. And it also meant running the electrical so that I would have power inside my tent. Now, this time, we need to install the life support that goes inside of here. Now, it's easy to start throwing in gear, but you actually have to follow a very specific order. You're going to see why in just a bit. You want to install your ventilation first, then your lighting, then the circulation inside the tent. If you don't follow that order, what you're going to find is that equipment gets in the way and the installation gets much, much, much more difficult. And trust me, because I know that from personal experience. There are a few pieces of support equipment that you're going to want in addition to the lighting and the ventilation and the fans that go inside the tent, namely something to help you hang. All it takes is for one heavy length to give you a lot of trouble before you realize that a ratchet system is the way to go. Now, these are not that expensive. You can find them on Amazon. In fact, I bought, I think, a 20-pack of these things for about $30. So if you get the chance, get a lot, because you're going to realize that they're helpful even outside of the grow tent. The other thing that you may want to add is some sort of wide Velcro strap. A lot of the ventilation kits that you might buy do include some sort of strap system, but they use some sort of buckle. That's not as easy. Especially if this is going to be a one-person project, you want to make sure you have something that allows you to strap your carbon filter canister to the top of the tent without a lot of physical exertion. With that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual vent system that we're going to be using inside our grow tent. The ventilation that I've chosen for this tent is this 8-inch hydroplanet setup. Now, what I like about this is it pretty much comes all self-contained except for a couple of additional accessories that I like. It's got the 8-inch fan, it's got the carbon filter, and it's got the ducting, as well as the clamps and a speed controller. This is a bit overkill for this. In fact, this probably has about 4 times as many cubic feet per minute that it can push through as I need for this tent. It's designed for something much, much bigger. But I've done this for 2 reasons. One, I'm probably going to be updating my grow tent at some point and making it a grow room, which means it's one less piece of equipment that I'm going to have to buy in the future. The other thing is that even though it is inefficient to run a large fan at a lower speed, I'm going to do it to reduce the amount of noise. You can probably hear a little bit of fan noise right now from my other tents. They're at their lowest setting and it's still almost unacceptable to me. So I'm going to be using the speed controller to run this at about quarter speed, which in addition to the larger blades should give me a much lower ambient noise level, which is what I'm looking for. A few things to know about the carbon filter that you choose. First of all is that you're looking for a unit that's going to be sealed up like this. This is how you know a company actually cares, because there is a good chance that there will be some charcoal dust, some activated carbon particles that are going to be bouncing around. You want to make sure that that's not going to get over everything the first time you open up the box. That's one of the things I like about Planet Hydro. The second thing is make sure that it includes a pre-filter. That's what this material is here. The reason for the pre-filter, as we've mentioned on Know-How, is you don't want the dust particles gumming up the charcoal, the activated carbon. It actually reduces its lifespan. What this will allow me to do is to catch those particles inside this, and then I can just wash this and put it back on. I'm good to go again for a couple of months. If you start to notice that the outflow is less and less and less, it probably means that you've got a dirty pre-filter. You just have to remove it and give it a nice wash. If you've never played with ducting before, you may want to give it a dry run before you try to install it in your tent. It can be a little frustrating when you're reaching above yourself and well, playing with unwieldy objects. Now, the ducting should fit, if it's the right size, over the mounting flange of your carbon filter and your fan. If the kit was complete, it included something like this. It's a clamp that allows you to put it over the ducting and then put the ducting over the flange and then tighten it down. If you want to add a little extra measure, what you can use is some aluminum tape around the edge to seal it up. But in my experience, the clamps, when done properly, can give you a pretty good seal. Before we get installing, let's talk pull or push. There are 2 main ways that you can install your carbon filter. The first is to, well, do it like this. You have the pre-filter on the outside of the filter, and the air gets sucked through the carbon filter into the fan and then disposed of outside of your grow room. Unfortunately, some people may not have enough room inside your tent depending on how big it is. You see, this is going to go up in the ceiling, and if you've got a very low hanging tent, or if there's a lot of crop in here, you may not have space inside the tent for this. Well, you could also do it as a push. If you do it as a push, you can take off the pre-filter and put it on the inside. Now you take the fan and you blow the air from inside the tent through the filter, and it gets filtered outside of your tent. It saves you a little bit of space, but personally I prefer the pull method. We also need to decide how we're going to vent from the tent. Now, my preferred method is to use one of these top vents because it allows the hottest air to be pushed out. But for the education of this video, we're going to use this side vent so we can see the other side a bit more clearly than if it was popping out of the top. Now, this tent will just take an 8-inch duct. So what you want to do is you want to open up the porthole and grab one side of this through the ducting and basically just force it out. Eventually you'll get it from the outside and you'll be able to attach the fan to the outside of the ducting. Once you've gotten a little bit of the ducting through the output hole, what you need to do is pull the rest of it through. Now remember, this length, you don't need a whole lot inside the tent, just enough to get the filter to where you want it in position. The rest of this is going to be used to connect to the fan, and then from the fan to the outside in order to vent all that hot air away from your grow area. I've left just enough of the duct so that it will reach down to the floor, so it's an easier time to install this against the filter. Now there's a bracket here that I've stretched the ductwork over. It's not the easiest thing to do. You're going to have to do a little bit of a primping, a little stretching. Essentially hold the ductwork against one side of the flange and then pull it over the rest of it. You do need to get enough of this over the top of it so that when you do clamp down, by turning this screw a couple of times, it gives you a nice tight seal. Otherwise what you'll get is air leakage. Now the one thing that you don't want to do is to have any holes in the duct or a leaky flange, because that means that air that doesn't go through the carbon filter will get exhausted by the fan, essentially defeating the purpose of having this in the first place. This is what the finished mounting looks like. As you can see, I've strapped it to one of the main poles on the side of the tent. The reason why I didn't put it up in the center is because I want to reserve all the space up top for the hangers that are ultimately going to hold my lights. Just as we attach the ductwork to the carbon filter inside of the tent, we now need to connect it to our exhaust fan. Now this means I'm going to take my 8-inch clamp and put it over the top of the ducting, and then just as I squeezed it over the flange on the carbon filter, I have to do the same thing for my fan. Now a quick note about this fan, you'll notice that there's a mounting flange on both sides. That's because I want to be able to draw air into the fan, and then I want to be able to exhaust it outside of the room ideally. Out here, I'm going to go ahead and exhaust it into the grow room, but that's just because I haven't yet run my exhausts. Once again, I don't think I can overstate the importance of having a larger fan. It's just so much more quiet. In fact, here's what it sounds like on full. So if I put this on full power, it eventually gets up to about this, which is loud, but it is still far more manageable than the typical 6-inch fan, the 6-inch blower that we might have. But when I put it into variable mode, I'm now running it at half speed, and this thing is even quieter than the box fan that I use in my grow room. So if you get an oversized fan, yes, you can run it slower. Now it will be less efficient, and yes, the motor will burn out a bit more quickly, but we're talking about years here, so you've got a lot of spare time. So we've got our ventilation into the tent. We have a way to make sure that we can exchange the air so that I can get enough carbon dioxide to my plants. Now I need to give it some light. I'm going to start with this. We've had this on the show before. This is a T5 fixture, just 400 watts, but it will give us a start so that we can start having our seedlings. Now, as they continue to grow, I'm going to be adding supplementary light. I'm going to add a couple of LED panels, and I might even add a couple of strips on the side so that I can get those angles that you can't get when all your lighting is up top. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this segment, I'm going to be using some light hangers to make my job a lot easier. Let me show you how those work. I'm using a pair of VivoSun light hangers, and they're very simple devices. They're ratcheted, which means it has a release that allows you to pull back and, well, extract whatever cable you've got running through it. It's got two clips on either side for quick release. What I like to do is have the ratchet side attached to the light, and I use this clip to clip up to the middle pole, the support pole. This means that I can quickly attach my lights. I can drop these all the way to the floor, and just like I did with the carbon fiber filter, I can assemble things on the floor of my grow tent rather than trying to juggle them up in space. Now, the main advantage of having a system like this is not just that it's easier to install, but using these ratchets means that I can raise and lower the lights depending on how much growth I've got out of my plants. The idea is to not have them so high that your plants start to stretch. You want to keep the node length a little bit small so you can keep things like herbs a little bit bushier, so you can keep roses from getting that really leggy look. The other thing about this is it makes it a lot easier to service. When it comes time to change out your lights, rather than having to figure out exactly where you ran all your support cables, you just unclip and replace. Now that we've got the ventilation and the lighting installed into our tent, there's one last bit that we need before we can say that the live support is ready, and that is internal fans. Now, this is important. Not only do they allow me to keep my crops cool, especially if it's a warm day and I've got my internal lights, but the gentle breeze that I create means that I get stronger stems, which means I get better growth. Now, the trick is not to point them directly at the plants. That will give you windburn, which doesn't look good. Instead, use a fan like this, which is a clip-on. This is a $10 fan. Clip it to one of the support poles and then aim it away. Remember, the idea is not to blow directly on the plants, but to create enough of a draft, enough of a breeze, that you get this nice swaying motion and it moves the heat and the carbon dioxide around the room. Now, to install this, you simply do that, clip it into place, and turn it on. Now, this will make sure that I can have a strong set of crops at the same time that I don't burn them out from excess heat. Now, this grow tent isn't finished. There's a lot more customization that we can do, everything from the lighting to increasing the ventilation to automating my irrigation. Now, that's going to come in a future episode of Grow How. But for now, this is ready to grow. If you've got a soil grow, this will grow it just fine. It will give you enough carbon dioxide, it will give you enough ventilation, and it will definitely give you enough light to get started. Of course, you don't need a tent this big. You don't need a grow room like this. You don't need dedicated electrical utilities like I've done for this space. But no matter how big or how small, now you know how to create life support for your next grow.